Snap! That's the sound of the HOA president breaking the only key to my cabin after she blocked my access road with a massive steel gate. When I drove up to my own property and found myself completely locked out, this woman stood there, smiling like she'd already won. That was the exact moment I knew she'd walked straight into my trap. What happened next turned her from smirking with victory to literally begging on her knees while 47 neighbors cheered my name. Ready for the craziest HOA revenge story ever? Comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far this neighborhood justice travels. Fast forward to 6 months ago, when I finally found that place to breathe, a rustic cabin at the end of an 800-meter private road in Pine Valley, about 2 hours outside Seattle. The property had been in my family since 1952 when my grandfather bought it as a hunting retreat. I owned the last 200 meters of the road, while the first 600 meters ran through Pine Valley Estates, an upscale HOA community of 47 homes. The cabin was perfect, isolated enough for me to work on my games without distraction, but close enough to civilization that I wouldn't become a complete hermit. I just released Grief's Echo, a game about loss and healing that had unexpectedly gone viral, and I needed space to process both my success and my ongoing grief. The morning I moved in, the Pacific Northwest fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but when it cleared, the view took my breath away, endless pine forests stretching to Mount Rainier in the distance. That's when she showed up. Barbara Whitfield, president of the Pine Valley HOA, materialized at my door like a bad omen. Her bleach blonde hair helmet perfect despite the morning humidity. She clutched a clipboard with trembling hands, a detail I'd later recognize as a sign of gambling withdrawal. "Mr. Morrison," she chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Welcome to Pine Valley. I heard you're the famous game developer? My daughter Jessica absolutely loves Grief's Echo. She plays it constantly." I nodded politely, not in the mood for small talk. "Thank you. Is there something you need?" Her smile widened, and I noticed her hands shaking harder as she gripped the clipboard. "Actually, I have a proposal that could benefit us both. Jessica just went through a terrible breakup, and this cabin would be perfect for her healing process. I'm prepared to offer $180,000 cash." I almost laughed. I'd paid $300,000 for the property, and market value was easily over $400,000. "No thank you," I said, starting to close the door. Her perfectly manicured hand shot out to stop it. "Are you sure about that, Mr. Morrison? Pine Valley has certain standards, and I'm the one who sets those standards." The threat in her voice was unmistakable, but I had dealt with worse in online gaming community, I'm quite sure. "Have a nice day, Barbara." As I closed the door, I caught her expression, not anger, but excitement, like a cat who just spotted a particularly juicy mouse. Later that afternoon, my nearest neighbor, Robert Thompson, stopped by with a six-pack and a warning. Robert was a 45-year-old ex-Marine with a scar running down his left cheek and the kind of thousand-yard stare that spoke of too many tours in Afghanistan. "You just rejected Barbara Whitfield," he said, settling onto my porch. "Either you're brave or stupid, and I haven't decided which yet." I accepted a beer, gratefully. "What's her deal?" Robert's expression darkened. 3 families in 2 years, all refused to sell to Barbara or her associates. All of them were gone within 6 months. Financial ruin, stress-induced health problems. One guy even had a stroke. She used to be a real estate lawyer before she lost her license, but she didn't lose her skills. And lately she seems desperate about something. He paused, looking out at the forest. "I overheard her on the phone last week promising someone named Tony that she'd have money within 30 days. She sounded scared. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just entered a game where I didn't know the rules yet. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with an email from the HOA. Urgent security notice, effective immediately. The Pine Valley access road will be gate-controlled to ensure community safety. Implementation begins Monday at 6 a.m. Monday morning arrived with typical Seattle drizzle. I loaded my car with supplies for a week at the cabin, already planning the next chapter of my new game. But as I turned onto the access road, my coffee nearly spilled. A massive steel gate blocked the path, complete with security cameras and a keypad entry system. A sign read, "Pine Valley, HOA, members only. Violators will be prosecuted." And there was Barbara, standing beside the gate in a pink tracksuit, her smile as wide as a shark. She held up a single key, apparently the only physical key to the gate. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. It seems you forgot to register for HOA membership. No membership, no access. That's bylaw 47B. She made a show of checking her clipboard. "Oh, And the membership fee is $50,000 initial payment plus $2,000 monthly. The deadline was yesterday. Then, in a move of pure theatrical cruelty, she held up the key and snapped it in half. The pieces fell to the wet pavement with a tiny clink. "Oops," she said, her eyes gleaming with malicious joy. "Looks like you'll need to find another way to your cabin." I didn't panic. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called Madison Fuller, a property lawyer I'd known since Stanford. Her voice trembled slightly when she heard my name, something I didn't catch at the time but would later understand. "Daniel? It's been too long. What do you need?" I explained the situation while Barbara watched from behind her gate, probably thinking she'd already won. "I'll research this tonight," Madison promised. "Nobody can just block access to your property. That's basic law." The emergency HOA meeting that evening was a masterclass in manipulation. Robert had invited me as his guest, and I watched Barbara work the room like an evangelical preacher selling salvation. "Safety first, everyone. We've had reports of prowlers, attempted thefts, even drug activity on our access road." She presented no evidence, just fear-mongering and dramatic hand gestures that made her clipboard shake even more. The meeting room in the Pine Valley Community Center smelled like stale coffee and desperation. About 30 residents had shown up, most looking confused about the emergency nature of the gathering. Barbara had strategically placed her allies in the front row. I recognized them from Robert's earlier descriptions. The projector showed grainy security footage of absolutely nothing suspicious, just normal delivery trucks and the occasional deer. "As you can see," Barbara continued, clicking through empty slides, "the threat is real and immediate. We cannot afford to wait until something terrible happens. The gate is already installed for your protection." A younger resident raised his hand. "Who authorized the expense? Gates like that cost tens of thousands." Barbara's smile tightened. "The board approved it under emergency provisions. Safety doesn't have a price tag." I noticed she didn't mention the cost would be passed to residents through a special assessment, a detail I'd spotted in the fine print of her handout. Thomas Bradley, a 60-year-old board member, mumbled his support while avoiding eye contact with everyone. Martha Fuller enthusiastically seconded every motion Barbara made. Old Robert Hayes, a widower pushing 70, gazed at Barbara like she was a goddess descended from heaven. When I stood to speak, the room fell silent. "I own the cabin at the end of the road. I'm not an HOA member, and you have no right to block my access." Barbara's smile never wavered. "Mr. Morrison, your right-of-way passes through our property. We have every right to regulate it for community safety. You're welcome to apply for membership, of course. $50,000 initial fee, $2,000 monthly, or," she paused dramatically, "you could always find another way to your cabin." The room erupted in whispers, but I caught Robert's eye. He mouthed one word: bullshit. After the meeting, several residents approached me privately. "She's been planning this for months," whispered Nancy Chen, a retired teacher. "Ever since you refused to sell. She's obsessed with your property." Another resident, Jim Torres, pulled me aside. "My brother's a contractor. He says that gate installation was rushed. No proper permits, no safety inspections. She paid cash to get it done over the weekend." The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't about security. It was a calculated move to force me out. But Barbara had made one crucial error. She'd assumed I'd inherited just the cabin from my grandfather, not his meticulous record-keeping and foresight. Madison worked through the night, and by dawn she was trekking through the forest to reach my cabin, avoiding the blocked road entirely. She burst through my door, out of breath but triumphant, holding a folder of old documents. "Your grandfather was a genius," she exclaimed, her hands shaking as she spread the papers on my table. "Look at this, the original easement from 1952. She pointed to a highlighted section, her finger trembling. Clause 7 states, "Should access be unreasonably impeded, the property owner maintains the right to reclaim the full 200 meters of road." Daniel, do you understand what this means? I studied the faded text, my pulse quickening. "It means I can block their road?" Madison's grin was almost feral. "Not just block it, you own that stretch, and here's the beautiful part. It's the only road connecting those 47 houses to the highway. Barbara just played herself." Something shifted in Madison's expression then, a flash of guilt I didn't understand. She looked at the photo of Rachel on my mantle, and her eyes went red. "Daniel, about that night, there's something I need to tell you, but I wasn't ready for whatever confession she was holding. Not now, Madison. Let's focus on this." She nodded, visibly relieved at the reprieve. That evening, Robert shared more intelligence. He'd been watching Barbara carefully since our confrontation. "She's getting more desperate. I saw her taking calls in her car, crying and promising someone she'd have money soon. And get this, Carlos Mendez, the old security guard she fired last year, he pulled me aside at the grocery store. Said he has 20 years of notebooks documenting everything that happens in Pine Valley. Every dirty deal, every forced sale, every suspicious incident. Madison had done more than just research the easement. She had traced the property records and discovered something interesting. Daniel, did you know the land your cabin sits on has historical significance? There are notes about Native American artifacts being found there in the 1970s. If that's verified, it could complicate any development plans. I filed that information away for later, focusing on the immediate problem. So what's our plan? I asked. Madison pulled out her laptop and showed me a map. First, we need to document everything. Every interaction, every threat, every attempt to block your access. Second, we hire a construction crew to install your own gate at your property line. And third, she paused, studying me carefully. Do you have a backup plan for accessing your cabin? I couldn't help but smile. The first real smile since Barbara's visit. Actually, I bought the adjacent land 6 months ago. Rachel always said to have an exit strategy. I showed Madison the satellite view on my laptop. I've already built a private road connecting my cabin directly to the highway. It costs $50,000, but I consider it an investment in karma. Madison stared at me in shock. You planned for this? I shook my head. Not exactly. I planned for peace. But my game development experience taught me something important. Players will always find ways to break your system. The only defense is to have multiple solutions to every puzzle. As Madison prepared to leave, taking the forest path back to her car, she turned at the door. Daniel, Barbara just filed an emergency injunction. She's claiming your cabin is illegally built on HOA common land. I felt my smile widen. This was exactly what I'd been waiting for. Perfect, I said, opening my laptop. She just activated my trap card. Want to see something beautiful? On the screen was a folder labeled Nuclear Option, containing every document needed to prove my ownership and, more importantly, my right to control the road. The game was about to begin in earnest. 48 hours later, at 5:45 in the morning, Barbara Whitfield stood alone in her bedroom, counting anti-anxiety pills with shaking hands. She'd been awake all night, alternating between online poker sites and frantic calculations of her debt to Tony Romano. When her phone rang, she almost dropped the pill bottle. What do you mean he blocked the road? Her scream probably woke half the neighborhood. I'd hired the construction crew to work overnight, and they'd done a masterful job. At the exact boundary of my property line, a gleaming automated steel gate now stood sentinel. But this wasn't just any gate. I'd gone full tech with it. Security cameras covered every angle, an AI-powered license plate reader could identify every vehicle, and a professional-grade speaker system allowed two-way communication. The payment terminal accepted credit cards, debit cards, even cryptocurrency if someone was feeling adventurous. I may have gone slightly overboard, but when you're making a point, you might as well make it in style. By 6:30, chaos reigned on Pine Valley Drive. 20 cars sat in a growing line, horns blaring, parents panicking, kids crying in the back seats. The school bus was trapped behind a contractor's van, and the driver was on his radio, explaining why 47 students would be late. Barbara came racing over in her silk pajamas and last night's smeared mascara, her Mercedes screeching to a halt inches from my gate. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, pounding on her steering wheel. "You can't do this!" I sat calmly in my camping chair next to the gate, laptop open, actually getting some work done on my new game. The villain was taking shape nicely. A controlling HOA president with a gambling addiction. Sometimes life really does right itself. "Good morning, Barbara," I said pleasantly, taking a sip of my coffee. "This is my property line. According to the easement agreement of 1952, Clause 7, when you unreasonably impeded my access, I gained the right to reclaim my full 200 meters of road." But emergency vehicles," Barbara sputtered, her face turning an alarming shade of purple. "I've already filed an alternate route with emergency services through Smith Ranch Road," I replied. "It only adds 15 minutes to response time, completely legal." I glanced at my watch. "Now, I'm not heartless. $200 per vehicle to pass through, credit cards accepted." Or, I gestured toward the detour. "Everyone can take the scenic route through Smith Ranch. Only adds 20 minutes to the morning commute." The crowd turned on Barbara like a pack of wolves. Nancy Harris, a mother of 3, was first to attack. "My daughter's insulin is in the refrigerator. If it goes bad because we can't get home, I'll sue the entire HOA." Jim Fitzgerald, a high school teacher, joined in. I have 30 students waiting for me. My career won't be destroyed because of your power trip. Even mild-mannered Pastor Williams raised his voice. Barbara, this is madness. Open Morrison's gate immediately. Robert Thompson emerged as the voice of reason and leader of the mob. Barbara, he bellowed in his drill sergeant voice. He's within his legal rights. You created this mess. Now fix it. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. After reviewing my documents and making several phone calls, the senior officer turned to Barbara. Ma'am, this is a civil matter. Mr. Morrison is within his rights to control access to his property. Unless you can prove otherwise, we can't intervene. Barbara's composure finally cracked completely. Her hands shook so violently she dropped her phone twice, trying to call her lawyer. You don't understand, she screamed at the crowd. I need that cabin. I need the money. She caught herself, realizing she'd revealed too much. Need? I stood up, suddenly very interested. That's an interesting choice of words, Barbara. Why exactly do you need my cabin? Her face went white beneath the smeared makeup. On my laptop screen, the drone footage I'd been recording showed an aerial view of the situation, the line of cars, the angry crowd, and best of all, my newly constructed private road winding through the adjacent property directly to the highway. Robert whistled appreciatively as he saw the feed. You built an escape route before the war even started. That's some serious strategic thinking. I shrugged. Game Design 101. Never create a puzzle with only one solution. Players hate that. Barbara's phone rang, and when she saw the caller ID, her face went from white to green. She stepped away from the crowd, but my cameras still picked up the audio. Tony, please, just 48 more hours. I'll have the cabin. No, please don't hurt Jessica. She has nothing to do with... Yes, I understand. Yes, sir. The call ended, and Barbara stood frozen, staring at her phone. Then, as if summoned by her mother's terror, Jessica Whitfield stepped out of an Uber, pulling a designer suitcase behind her. The 28-year-old makeup artist from New York looked exhausted and terrified, mascara streaming down her face. She held up her phone with shaking hands, showing her mother the screen. On it was a photo of her apartment door in Manhattan, spray-painted with red letters, Mommy owes you pay. Barbara's knees buckled and she collapsed onto the wet asphalt. Baby, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I thought I could win it back. I thought I could fix everything before they... Before they what, Mom? Jessica's voice cracked. Before they found me? They knew where I live. They knew where I work. What did you do? The crowd had gone silent, everyone suddenly realizing this was bigger than a simple property dispute. In the distance, the distinctive rumble of a black SUV's engine cut through the morning air. Barbara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with pure terror. Everyone run, she whispered. Then louder, everyone run, now! But the SUV stopped at a respectful distance, engine idling like a predator deciding whether to pounce. The tinted window rolled down just enough for us to see a hand emerge, making a phone gesture. Barbara's cell rang immediately. She answered with trembling fingers, listened for 10 seconds, then hung up. 48 hours, she said to no one in particular. They're giving me 48 hours. The professional HOA president, the woman who'd terrorized families for years, was gone. In her place stood a desperate mother who'd gambled away not just her own future, but her daughter's safety. The game had just become deadly serious. Mom owes the mafia $200,000, and they threaten to kill me if she doesn't pay. Jessica's words hung in the morning air like a funeral bell. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips as the entire crowd fell silent. Barbara had curled into herself on the ground, looking more like a broken child than the tyrant who terrorized Pine Valley for years. Through the security cameras I'd installed, I could see everything in high definition, including the tears cutting tracks through Barbara's makeup. The night before, while researching the easement, I'd stumbled across something in my new game's code. The villain I'd been designing, the gatekeeper, looked exactly like Barbara. Blonde helmet hair, clipboard in hand, cold smile. My subconscious had been trying to tell me something. Jessica's revelations poured out like water from a broken dam. She'd discovered everything when she'd used her mother's laptop during a visit last month. The browser history told a story of addiction spiraling out of control. Online poker sites, loan applications, increasingly desperate searches for quick money. It started after Dad left, Jessica explained, helping her mother to her feet. Mom said it was just entertainment, just a way to relax. But then she started chasing losses. First credit cards, then personal loans, then loan sharks, and finally, she swallowed hard, the Romano family. Thomas Bradley, who'd been silent throughout the confrontation, suddenly exploded. "I knew it!" His face turned red as decades of suppressed rage burst free. "She's been blackmailing me for 5 years. She has photos of me with someone who isn't my wife. Every time I tried to oppose her, she'd remind me what she could do to my marriage." Martha Fuller confessed next, tears streaming down her face. "I took kickbacks, 10% of every forced sale. My son needed rehab, and I told myself it was for a good reason, but I knew what we were doing was wrong." The dominoes kept falling. Robert Thompson pulled me aside, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from PTSD triggered by the morning's chaos. "Daniel, I have something to tell you. About the night Rachel died." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. "My truck's dash cam caught everything. I've been carrying this for 3 years, too cowardly to speak up." My world tilted. "You? You know who killed her?" Robert's voice broke, the tough Marine facade crumbling. "Brian Whitfield, Barbara's younger brother. He was driving drunk from the casino. And," he paused, gathering courage, "there was someone else in the car." Before he could continue, Madison grabbed my arm. Her face had gone pale, and tears were already forming in her eyes. "Daniel, I can't keep this secret anymore. Robert's right. I was in the car with Brian that night." The confession hit me like a physical blow. Madison Fuller, my college friend, my legal advisor, had been there when Rachel died. "We were at a bar association conference," she continued, her words coming faster now. "Brian was a speaker I was attending. We both drank too much. He offered to drive me home. I should have stopped him, but I was drunk too. When we hit," she choked on the words, "when we hit Rachel's car, I called 911 immediately. I tried CPR, but she was already gone. Brian panicked and ran. I stayed until the ambulance arrived, but I never told them about Brian. I was a coward. And the worst part, I've been in love with you since Stanford. I couldn't bear the thought of you hating me." The revelations were coming too fast. Barbara had known about her brother's involvement and covered it up. Madison had lived with the guilt for 3 years. Robert had evidence, but was too traumatized by his military experiences to come forward. He'd once reported a fellow soldier for war crimes, only to have the man commit suicide when no one believed Robert's account. The weight of all these secrets had been crushing everyone. Looking around at the assembled crowd, I saw not just my tormentor and her victims, but a community poisoned by lies and guilt. Barbara was still on her knees, but now she was pulling something up on her phone. "There's more," she said quietly. "Jessica, baby, I'm so sorry. The cabin, it was never for you." She showed us emails with Megacore Development. They'd offered $750,000 for my cabin, the last piece they needed for a massive resort development. Barbara had planned to buy it for $180,000 and flip it for a $570,000 profit. But even that revelation paled compared to what Jessica discovered in her mother's email. She said, her voice hollow. "Megacore isn't a real development company. It's a front. These incorporation documents, they trace back to the Romano crime family. They're using development projects to launder money." Barbara nodded miserably. "I found out too late. By then I already owed Tony money. He said if I could deliver the properties, he'd forgive the debt. But you kept refusing, Daniel. And the more you refused, the more desperate I became. I started taking bigger risks, stealing from the HOA funds to make partial payments. The security guard Carlos had been right. This went deeper than anyone imagined. Pine Valley wasn't just being targeted for development. It was being groomed as a money laundering operation for organized crime, and Barbara, in her desperation to feed her gambling addiction, had become their inside agent. "The artifacts," I said suddenly, remembering Madison's research. "The Native American artifacts on my property. That's why they need my specific plot. If the government verifies the historical significance, the entire area becomes protected land. No development would be possible." Barbara laughed bitterly. "You think Tony Romano cares about artifacts? He cares about washing $50 million through fake construction projects. And if I don't deliver," she looked at Jessica, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not the calculated worry of a schemer, but the raw terror of a mother who'd put her child in mortal danger. Madison's hands were still shaking as she showed me her phone. On the screen was a photo from that night 3 years ago, timestamp 11:47 p.m., location tagged at the intersection where Rachel died. In the photo, Madison sat in the passenger seat while Brian drove, both clearly intoxicated, and in the rearview mirror, barely visible but unmistakable, was the approaching headlights of Rachel's car. "I'm so sorry, Daniel," Madison whispered. "I've lived with this every day. I quit criminal law because I couldn't face defending others when I'd been too cowardly to confess my own crime. I thought if I helped you now, maybe I could start to make amends. The weight of 3 years of grief, lies, and secrets threatened to crush me. But as I stood there, surrounded by broken people and shattered lives, I remembered Rachel's words, create something beautiful from the hurt. The question was, could beauty emerge from this much pain? Madison's confession shattered what was left of my composure. 3 years of wondering, 3 years of sleepless nights, and the answer had been right in front of me all along. But before I could process the betrayal, the black SUV's door opened, and Tony Romano himself stepped out. The man was smaller than I'd expected, but he carried himself with the kind of quiet menace that made everyone step back. 2 larger men flanked him, their faces expressionless beneath identical sunglasses. "Enough of this drama," Tony said, his voice carrying despite the distance. "Mrs. Whitfield, you've had plenty of time. Where's my money?" Barbara scrambled to her feet, pulling Jessica behind her protectively. "Mr. Romano, I'm close. The cabin is right there. Just give me 48 hours, Tony interrupted. "That's what I gave you 6 weeks ago. Then 48 more. And 48 more after that." He looked around at the assembled crowd with mild interest. "Which one of you is Morrison?" I stepped forward, my mind still reeling from Madison's revelation, but forcing myself to focus. "That's me." Tony studied me for a long moment. "You're the developer of Grief's Echo?" The question threw me completely. "Yes?" His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "My son Vincent plays that game constantly. It helped him after his mother died. Cancer." He paused, then hardened again. "But business is business. Barbara owes me $200,000. She promised me this cabin would cover it. Either she delivers, or," he glanced meaningfully at Jessica, "let's just say I always collect what I'm owed." This was spiraling beyond anything I'd imagined. What had started as a property dispute had become something out of a crime thriller, but before anyone could respond, the morning air filled with sirens. "Nobody move! FBI!" The federal agents seemed to materialize from everywhere at once, emerging from unmarked vans, rappelling from helicopters that appeared over the tree line, even rising from concealed positions in the crowd. The lead agent, a woman with steel grav hair and eyes to match, held up her badge. "Antonio Romano, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Megacore development, Pine Valley corruption, all of it." Tony actually laughed. "Well, this is awkward timing." He raised his hands slowly, his bodyguards following suit. The agent turned to Barbara next. "Mrs. Whitfield, we have your laptop. Every email, every transaction, every communication with the Romano family. You can cooperate and testify, or you can join Mr. Romano in federal prison. Your choice." Barbara collapsed again, but this time Jessica didn't help her up. The young woman stood straight, tears dried, looking at her mother with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You destroyed everything," she said quietly. "Our family, our home, our name. For what? For poker chips and false promises?" The FBI agent approached me privately while her team processed the scene. "Mr. Morrison, we've been investigating Megacore for 2 years. Your gate stunt forced their hand, made them show themselves. We couldn't have asked for better timing." She paused, studying me. "We found something else in Barbara's files that you should know about. A contract dated a week before your wife's accident. A $50,000 payment to Brian Whitfield for services to be rendered. We can't prove it was a hit, but..." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. Rachel's death might not have been a drunk driving accident, it might have been murder. My legs gave out, and I found myself sitting on the wet pavement, my mind unable to process any more revelations. Madison knelt beside me, her own guilt temporarily forgotten in the face of this new horror. "Daniel, I swear I didn't know. Brian said he'd been at the casino, that he'd been drinking. I never imagined," but I was beyond listening. The grief I'd carefully managed for 3 years came crashing back, mixed with rage so pure it felt like fire in my veins. I stood up slowly, walked to my security station, and locked myself in the small control booth. Through the bulletproof glass I could see the FBI arresting Tony and his men, Barbara being questioned, the crowd milling in confusion. Inside the booth I broke down completely. For the first time since the hospital, I truly let myself feel the loss. Rachel was gone. Murdered, possibly. The killer was dead, the conspirators were being arrested, but none of it would bring her back. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard knocking. Through tear-blurred eyes, I saw Jessica standing outside. "Mr. Morrison?" I know you have no reason to listen to me, but please. There's something else you need to know. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Jessica's face was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. My mom is a monster. I see that now. But there's a 12-year-old boy named Vincent who idolizes you, who played your game every day after his mother died, who dreams of making games like you someday. Tony Romano is a criminal, but he's also a grandfather who loves that boy. Don't let our parents' sins destroy his future too. I thought about Rachel, about what she would want. She'd always believed in second chances, in redemption, in finding light in the darkness. What do you want me to do? I asked. Jessica pulled out her phone, showing me a video. It was Vincent Romano, a skinny kid with his grandfather's eyes but none of his hardness. In the video, he was explaining to a camera how grief's echo had helped him understand that his mother's death wasn't his fault, that grief was just love with nowhere to go. Tony asked me to show you this, Jessica said. He said if anything happened to him, to ask if you'd mentor Vincent. Not for Tony, for a kid who just wants to create something beautiful from his pain. The parallel to Rachel's last words wasn't lost on me. As I watched the FBI lead Tony away in handcuffs, he caught my eye and nodded once. A grandfather's plea, criminal or not. I made my decision. Stepping out of the booth, I addressed the FBI agent. I'll cooperate fully, testify about everything. But I have conditions. I laid them out. Barbara gets drug and gambling rehabilitation as part of any plea deal. Madison does mandatory pro bono work for DUI victims' families, and Vincent Romano gets to attend coding classes with me as his instructor. I can't bring my wife back, I said, my voice steady despite the tears. But maybe I can stop this cycle of pain from claiming more victims? The agent nodded slowly. We can work with that. As the scene wound down, the crowd dispersing, the FBI finishing their operation, I stood by my gate, the symbol of my revenge that had somehow become the catalyst for justice. Madison approached hesitantly. Daniel, I know you can't forgive me. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I need you to know, I think about Rachel every day. Every client I help, every good thing I try to do, it's my way of honoring her memory. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years. I saw not the successful lawyer, but the broken woman carrying a secret that had poisoned her entire life. I don't forgive you, I said quietly. Not yet. But Rachel believed in second chances. So prove to me you deserve one. Help enough people, save enough lives, and maybe someday we can both find peace. The morning that had started with petty revenge had become something else entirely, a reckoning for an entire community built on lies. But as I looked at the faces around me, I saw something Rachel would have recognized, the first glimpse of healing. Real healing, not the kind that comes from isolation in a cabin, but the kind that comes from facing hard truths together. The gate would come down eventually, but first there was work to do. 6 months had passed since the morning that changed everything. I sat on my cabin porch, finally able to breathe without the weight of unanswered questions crushing my chest. The local news droned on my laptop. In the largest RICO conviction in Pacific Northwest history, the Romano crime family received a combined 147 years in federal prison. The investigation, triggered by a property dispute in Pine Valley, uncovered a $50 million money laundering operation. I turned it off. I'd lived through enough drama to last several lifetimes. The transformation of Pine Valley had been remarkable. Barbara Whitfield, now 97 days sober, worked as a receptionist at the same rehabilitation center where she'd gotten clean. She lived in a modest apartment, rebuilding her relationship with Jessica one careful day at a time. She'd called me last week not to ask for anything, just to tell me she was sponsoring another gambling addict. She reminds me of myself, Barbara had said, so certain she can win it all back. Thank you for giving me the chance to help her see there's another way. Madison Fuller had thrown herself into redemption with the same intensity she'd once applied to corporate law. Her free legal clinic for DUI victims' families had helped 47 people in 6 months. She'd started dating a high school teacher. Someone normal, she'd told me with a rueful smile. Someone who doesn't come with my kind of baggage. She sent me updates on her cases, careful professional emails that never pushed for more contact than I was ready for. The guilt was still there, would always be there. But she was channeling it into something positive. Robert Thompson had been elected HOA president in a unanimous vote. His first official act was to remove the gate I'd installed, with a new rule, no access restrictions without 100% community approval. He'd also finally sought treatment for his PTSD. Telling the truth about that dashcam footage was better therapy than 20 years of avoiding it, he'd told me over beers last month. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was Vincent Romano. The 12-year-old had thrown himself into coding with an intensity that reminded me of myself at that age. Despite his grandfather being in federal prison, or perhaps because of it, Vincent was determined to build something positive with his life. He'd already created a simple app to help kids with incarcerated parents stay connected through secure video messages. "Uncle D," he'd asked me last week, "do you think Grandpa would be proud of me?" I'd answered honestly, "I think he'd be proud you're choosing a different path." The archaeological survey Carlos had hinted at revealed the truth about Pine Valley. My cabin sat on a Native American ceremonial ground dating back to the 17th century, a place where indigenous peoples had come for healing rituals for generations. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sought healing in a place that had been sacred for that very purpose for hundreds of years. The discovery meant no massive development could ever happen here. Pine Valley was protected forever. My new game, Second Chances, launched to critical acclaim. Unlike Grief's Echo, which dealt with loss, this one focused on redemption and forgiveness. Players navigated a world where every character, no matter how villainous, had a path to redemption if they chose to take it. The reviews were mixed. Some found it too forgiving. Others praised its nuanced take on human nature. But my favorite response came from a player who wrote, "I thought this would be about revenge. Instead, it taught me about humanity." The game featured an Easter egg that made me smile every time someone discovered it. If players chose to forgive every character, they unlocked a secret ending where the protagonist found peace in a cabin in the woods, surrounded by a community that had learned to heal together. The unexpected romantic development in my life had been Emma Rodriguez, a veterinarian who'd moved to Pine Valley after the drama died down. We'd met when she came to treat an injured hawk on my property. "You're gentle with damaged creatures," she'd observed, watching me calm the frightened bird. "Even when they try to bite." Our relationship developed slowly. Coffee, hikes, gaming sessions where she laughed at her terrible coordination. She didn't try to replace Rachel or fix my grief. She simply existed beside me, a calm presence that didn't demand more than I could give. Rachel would like her, Robert had mentioned casually one day, and I knew he was right. The Pine Valley Community Center now hosted monthly gatherings on my property. The gate that had once divided us had become a symbol of unity. Teenagers took selfies with it, calling it the Second Chance Gate. Barbara attended these gatherings, always staying on the periphery but slowly being welcomed back into the fold. Forgiveness was a process, not an event. Last week I'd received a letter from Tony Romano in federal prison. Vincent had shown him second chances, and apparently the hardened criminal had cried for the first time in 30 years. "Morrison," he'd written, "you gave my grandson something I never could, a future without violence. I owe you a debt I can never repay. If you ever need a favor, well, I still know people." I'd burned the letter immediately. Some offers shouldn't even be acknowledged. As I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the pines, Emma emerged with 2 cups of tea. Her hand rested briefly on her stomach. We'd found out about the pregnancy just yesterday. After 4 years of grief and isolation, life was finding its way back to me. "Thinking about Rachel?" Emma asked gently. I nodded. She told me to create something beautiful from the pain. I think I finally have. The cabin that had been meant as an escape had become the center of a transformed community. The road that had been blocked was now open to all, and the man who'd sought isolation had found connection in the most unexpected ways. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Morrison, I struggle with gambling addiction. Saw the news story about Pine Valley. Could I visit? T. Williams." I typed back, "The gate is always open. This is healing ground for everyone. Welcome." Because that's what Rachel would have wanted. Not just healing for me, but for everyone who needed it. 1 year later, Pine Valley had transformed from a battlefield into something resembling the community it had always pretended to be. The morning sun filtered through the trees as I stood at what had once been my revenge gate, now decorated with flowers and handmade signs reading "Second Chances Start Here" and "Healing Ground, All Welcome." The transformation was remarkable. Robert's leadership of the HOA had brought transparency and genuine community spirit. Monthly barbecues on my property had become tradition, with even Barbara attending regularly, no longer hovering at the edges but actively helping with setup and cleanup. "Redemption is a daily choice," she'd told me last month, flipping burgers with steady hands that no longer shook. Some days are harder than others, but every day I don't gamble is a victory. The archaeological designation of Pine Valley as a historical site had been finalized. No massive developments would ever destroy this land. Instead, we'd created a small museum dedicated to the native healing traditions, with guided tours that I sometimes led, explaining how this place had been meant for healing long before any of us arrived. Emma and I had designed a garden using indigenous plants that had been used in traditional healing ceremonies. Full circle, she'd said, watching me plant sage and sweetgrass. From pain to peace, just like the ancestors intended. Her pregnancy was progressing well, and we decided to name our daughter Rachel if it was a girl. Not to replace the Rachel I'd lost, but to honor the love that had led me to healing. The documentary offer hadn't come from a streaming giant, but from a public television station, wanting to tell the real story of community healing after trauma. The Pine Valley residents had voted unanimously to participate, with all profits going to addiction recovery programs. Barbara had been the most enthusiastic supporter. If my story helps one person avoid my mistakes, then maybe all that pain meant something. Vincent Romano, now 14, had become something of a coding prodigy. His latest creation, a mobile game about kids maintaining hope while their parents were incarcerated, had been downloaded over 1 million times. It wasn't violent or dark, just honest about the pain while emphasizing the possibility of different choices. Uncle D, he'd told me recently, I want to change my last name to Morrison. When I'd gently suggested that wasn't necessary, he'd shaken his head. You gave me something my family never could, the belief that I could be better than my bloodline. But I know I need to honor where I came from too. So maybe Vincent Romano Morrison? His grandfather had called from prison, the monitored line crackling with emotion. You gave him what I couldn't, Tony had said simply. A chance to choose his own path. Thank you. Even Madison had found her closure. We'd met for coffee one last time, a proper goodbye to the guilt that had bound us. I live each day trying to honor Rachel, she'd said. Every client I help, every family I serve, I think of her. I can't undo the past, but I can shape the future. She'd shown me the anonymous donations she'd been making to Rachel's Memorial Foundation, the letters she'd written to Rachel's mother that she'd never sent. I still couldn't offer complete forgiveness, but I acknowledged her efforts. Rachel believed in people's ability to change, I'd told her. Keep proving her right. The community festival marking the first anniversary of the gate incident had drawn visitors from across the state. People wanted to see the place where a simple property dispute had exposed organized crime, transformed a community, and ultimately led to healing. Barbara spoke about addiction with raw honesty. Robert discussed PTSD and the importance of truth. Madison talked about living with guilt and making amends. Jessica shared her experience of supporting loved ones through recovery. And I spoke about forgiveness, not as absolution, but as liberation from the weight of anger. Broken things can heal, I told the crowd. Crashed gates can become open doors. Even the deepest pain can transform into purpose. My wife Rachel knew that. It just took the rest of us longer to learn. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with Vincent teaching coding basics to interested kids, Emma running a booth about animal therapy, and the whole community sharing food and stories. It felt like what Pine Valley had always pretended to be, but never was, a real neighborhood where people cared for each other. Late that night, as Emma slept with her hand on her growing belly, I sat at my computer working on a new game. Hope's Echo, a sequel where players rebuilt after loss, creating communities from broken pieces. My phone lit up with a message from Jessica. Documentary producer loves our story, but I insisted Barbara plays herself. The woman deserves an Oscar for her performance in life. Might as well get one for TV too. I smiled and forwarded it to her with a note. Tell them yes, but we control the narrative. This is our story to tell. A second message appeared, this time from an unknown number. Mr. Morrison, I struggle with addiction and saw the documentary trailer. Is it true anyone can visit Pine Valley for healing? S. Parker. My response was automatic now. The gate is always open. Healing ground is for everyone. Welcome. The final irony hadn't escaped me. I had built a gate to keep people out and ended up creating a space that drew people in. The cabin meant for isolation had become a center for connection. The revenge I had planned had transformed into something resembling justice, and justice had evolved into healing. As I looked out the window at the gate illuminated by moonlight, now a landmark where teenagers took selfies and visitors left flowers, I thought about the journey from that morning when Barbara broke her key. The path had been painful, full of revelations I'd never wanted and truths that had shattered my world. But it had led here, to new life growing inside Emma, to Vincent coding at my kitchen table twice a week, to Barbara 90 days away from her 2-year sobriety chip, to a community that had learned to face its demons together. Second chances, I typed as the final line of code for the night. They're not about forgetting the past, they're about choosing a better future. The message on my screen blinked, compile complete, no errors found. If only life were that simple. But then again, maybe it was. Maybe healing really was just debugging the human heart, one line at a time. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and remember, if someone blocks your path, check the property rights from the 1950s. You never know what opportunities might be hiding in old documents. But more importantly, remember that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's showing people there's a better way. Peace out, Internet. May all your gates lead to better places.
Real people, real bad decisions. Really entertaining. Click like, hit subscribe, and prepare for more from BD Stories.